Most people know about Odin, Thor, and Loki. But the real power in Norse mythology, that was Frigga. And tonight, you're about to discover why even the gods feared her love. Her name was Frigga, and she was far more than just the wife of the All-Father. She was a mother, a queen, a protector. And she was a woman who would challenge the very fabric of fate itself. Over the next hour, we're going to explore her entire journey, from her origins as a goddess of the earth, to her rise as a queen of Asgard, to the moment that would change everything. We'll discover the choices she made, the power she wielded, and the price she paid for loving too deeply. This is the complete story of Frigga. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Chapter 1. Frigga was not Odin's primary wife. To understand Frigga, we first need to understand something that surprises most people. Frigga was not Odin's only significant relationship, and that's actually the key to understanding her real power. In modern storytelling, we often imagine ancient marriages as exclusive partnerships. One man, one woman, bound together forever. But Norse mythology didn't work that way. The gods operated under different rules than humans, and Odin, the All-Father, was perhaps the most complex in his relationships. Odin had many lovers throughout his existence. He had relationships with giants, with other goddesses, with mortal women. He fathered children with multiple partners. And Frigga knew about all of it. More importantly, she accepted it. Not because she had no choice, but because she understood something fundamental about power. Frigga's position as queen was not built on romantic exclusivity. It was built on something far more valuable. It was built on respect, on intelligence, and on her ability to manage the most powerful realm in existence. Think about this for a moment. If Frigga's power came from being Odin's favorite lover, then any other woman who caught his attention would be a threat to her position. But that's not how she operated. Her power came from being indispensable. She was the one who understood the workings of Asgard. She was the one who made decisions that kept the realm stable. She was the one the other gods turned to for wisdom. In Norse culture, there was a concept called a Frilla. This was a woman who had a significant relationship with a man, but not necessarily a marriage in the way we think of it today. Some scholars believe this is what Frigga's relationship with Odin actually was, at least in its origins. Not a romantic marriage, but a political and spiritual partnership. Over time, their relationship deepened. They had children together. They built a life together. But the foundation was never about exclusivity or romantic love in the way modern people understand it. It was about partnership, about shared purpose, about two powerful beings working together to maintain order in the cosmos. This is why Frigga was so secure in her position. She didn't need Odin to love only her. She needed Odin to respect her. And he did. Completely. When Odin took other lovers, Frigga didn't rage or scheme. She continued her work. She continued to be the steady hand that guided Asgard. She continued to be the one person Odin could truly trust with the most important decisions. This is actually one of the most counterintuitively powerful aspects of Frigga's character. She understood that real power doesn't come from controlling a man's heart. It comes from being so valuable, so essential, that your position becomes unshakable. No matter what happens, no matter who else enters the picture, you remain irreplaceable. In many ways, Frigga was ahead of her time. She didn't define herself through her relationship with Odin. She defined herself through her own capabilities, her own wisdom, her own strength. The marriage was important, yes, but it was not the source of her power. She was. This understanding will be crucial as we move forward in her story, because everything Frigga does, every choice she makes, comes from this place of inner strength and self-knowledge. She knows who she is, and she knows what she's capable of. Chapter 2. Frigga's Forgotten Origins. Before Frigga was a queen, before she was Odin's partner, before she was the mother of gods, she was something else entirely. She was a daughter, and her mother was one of the most powerful beings in existence. Frigga's mother was Fjörgyn, a goddess of the earth itself. In some versions of the mythology, Fjörgyn is described as a giantess. In others, she is a primordial goddess, one of the ancient powers that existed before even the Aesir came to prominence. What's clear is that she was formidable. She was connected to the very soil, to fertility, to the cycles of nature. When Frigga was born, she inherited something precious from her mother. She inherited a connection to the earth. She inherited an understanding of cycles and seasons, of growth and decay, of what it takes to nurture life. These were not small gifts. In Norse culture, these were the gifts of a goddess. Fjörgyn's influence on Frigga cannot be overstated. A mother shapes her daughter in ways that are often invisible but always profound. Fjörgyn taught Frigga about patience. The earth is patient. It waits through winter for spring. It endures through drought for rain. It continues, cycle after cycle, regardless of what happens above it. Fjörgyn taught Frigga about strength. The earth is not fragile. It can support the weight of mountains. It can nurture forests and feed civilizations. It can weather storms and earthquakes and still remain. This is the kind of strength Frigga would carry with her. Fjörgyn taught Frigga about protection. A mother protects her children. The earth protects all life that grows upon it. It provides shelter, nourishment, stability. This protective instinct would become central to who Frigga was. In the mythology, we don't have many direct stories about Frigga's childhood or her relationship with her mother. But we can infer much from what we know about both of them. Fjörgyn was a goddess who understood the deep, quiet power of nurturing. And Frigga became a goddess who wielded that same kind of power. When Frigga eventually came to Asgard, she brought this heritage with her. She brought the wisdom of the earth. She brought the patience of seasons. She brought the protective instinct of a mother. These things set her apart from other goddesses. They made her unique. Some scholars believe that Frigga's connection to the earth is why she was so effective as a queen. She understood that a realm, like the earth itself, needs to be tended. It needs care. It needs someone who understands that real power is not about domination, but about nurturing the conditions for life and growth. Frigga's origin story is also important because it explains something about her later choices. When she becomes a mother herself, when she gives birth to Baldur, she doesn't just love him as a mother loves a child. She loves him with the fierce, protective love of the earth itself. She loves him the way her mother loved her. This is why, later in her story, when Baldur is threatened, Frigga will go to such extraordinary lengths to protect him. It's not just maternal love. It's the accumulated love of generations of mothers, of the earth itself, channeled through one goddess who understands that protection is the highest form of power. Before Frigga was anything else, She was Fjörgen's daughter, and that made her everything she would become. Chapter 3. Frigga as Queen. Power Beyond the Throne. When Frigga became Queen of Asgard, she inherited a position that most people would find overwhelming. She was now responsible for the greatest realm in all of existence. But unlike many rulers, Frigga didn't see this as a burden. She saw it as an opportunity. A queen in Norse culture was not simply a decorative figure at her husband's side. She was a manager, a diplomat, a keeper of knowledge. She was often the one who held the realm together while the king was away on adventures or battles. Frigga understood this role deeply, and she excelled at it. One of Frigga's primary responsibilities was the management of Asgard's internal affairs. While Odin was often preoccupied with his own pursuits, his constant search for knowledge and power, Frigga was the one who ensured that the realm functioned smoothly. She oversaw the daily operations of the palace. She managed the resources of Asgard. She made sure that the gods had what they needed. But her role went far beyond simple administration. Frigga was also a counselor. When conflicts arose between gods, when decisions needed to be made about the future of the realm, Frigga's voice carried weight. The other gods respected her judgment. They sought her advice. Even Odin, for all his wisdom and power, valued her perspective. This is important to understand. Odin was the All-Father. He was the most powerful god in Asgard. But he was not the only voice that mattered. Frigga had earned her own authority through her intelligence, her fairness, and her deep understanding of what the realm needed. There are hints throughout the mythology of Frigga's diplomatic skills. She was the one who could smooth over tensions. She was the one who could find solutions that satisfied multiple parties. In a realm where gods had enormous egos and conflicting desires, this was an invaluable skill. Consider the relationship between Frigga and Loki. Loki was a troublemaker, a chaos agent, someone who constantly created problems for the other gods. Yet Frigga treated him with a kind of maternal patience. She didn't condone his actions, but she didn't reject him either. She understood that even Loki had a place in the cosmic order. This kind of nuanced thinking, this ability to see the complexity in situations, was what made Frigga such an effective queen. Frigga also had authority over certain domains that were specifically hers. She was associated with marriage, with motherhood, with domestic life. But don't mistake this for limitation. In Norse culture, these domains were not considered lesser. They were considered essential. A queen who controlled these aspects of society had enormous influence. Through her authority over marriage, Frigga had a say in the alliances that were formed through matrimonial bonds. Through her authority over motherhood and family, she had influence over the next generation of gods and the values they would inherit. Through her authority over domestic life, she shaped the culture and values of Asgard itself. Frigga was also a keeper of secrets and knowledge. In Norse mythology, knowledge is power. And Frigga possessed knowledge that few others had. She knew things about the future. She understood the workings of fate in ways that even Odin sometimes did not. This knowledge gave her additional authority and respect. There's a particular aspect of Frigga's role as queen that deserves special attention. She was the one who maintained the bonds of kinship and loyalty within Asgard. In a realm where gods were constantly at odds, where egos clashed and ambitions confided, Frigga was the one who reminded them of their connections to each other. She was the one who said, "You are family. You are bound together. You must find a way to work together. This might seem like a soft power, but it was actually one of the most important powers in Asgard. Because without these bonds, without this sense of unity and family, the realm would have torn itself apart long ago. Frigga held it together through her constant work to maintain relationships and harmony. Frigga's power as queen was also evident in her relationship with the other goddesses. She was respected by Sif, by Idun, by all the female deities of Asgard. They looked to her for guidance. They trusted her judgment. She was not threatened by their power or their beauty or their accomplishments. She celebrated them. And in doing so, she created a network of female power within Asgard that was formidable. One of the most important aspects of Frigga's role as queen was her responsibility for the well-being of all who lived in Asgard. This included not just the gods, but also the servants, the workers, the lesser beings who made the realm function. Frigga cared about their welfare. She made sure they were treated fairly. She ensured that the realm was not just powerful, but also just. This is what separated Frigga from many other rulers. She didn't see power as something to be hoarded or used for personal gain. She saw it as a responsibility. She had been given authority, and she used that authority to create a realm where life could flourish, where beings could thrive, where there was order and fairness. Frigga's intelligence was legendary. She was known for her wisdom, her ability to see situations clearly, her capacity to make decisions that served the greater good. When conflicts arose, when problems seemed unsolvable, people turned to Frigga, not because she had magical powers that could fix everything, but because she had the wisdom to see solutions that others missed. In many ways, Frigga's power as queen was quiet power. It wasn't flashy. It didn't involve grand battles or dramatic confrontations. It was the power of someone who understood how things actually work, who knew how to navigate complex situations, who could bring people together and find common ground. This is why, even though Odin was the All-Father, even though he was the most powerful god in Asgard, the realm could not function without Frigga. She was not his equal in raw power, perhaps, but she was his equal in authority. And, in many ways, she was more essential to the functioning of Asgard than he was. As we move forward in Frigga's story, it's important to remember this. She was not a queen who ruled from the shadows or who had to manipulate her way to power. She was a queen who earned her position through her capabilities, her wisdom, and her dedication to her realm. And that made her one of the most powerful beings in all of Norse mythology. Chapter 4. Frigga's Motherhood, Unconditional Love and Extreme Protection. When Frigga became a mother, something shifted within her. The queen, the counselor, the keeper of wisdom, all of these roles continued. But now there was something else. There was a love so profound, so all-consuming, that it would eventually define her entire existence. Frigga's first and most famous child was Baldur, and from the moment he was born, he was different. Baldur was beautiful in a way that transcended physical appearance. He radiated light. He radiated goodness. He was, in many ways, the embodiment of everything good and pure in the world. And Frigga loved him with a love that was almost painful in its intensity. To understand Frigga's relationship with Baldur, you have to understand something about motherhood in Norse culture. A mother was not just a caregiver. She was a protector, a guide, a spiritual anchor. She was responsible not just for her child's physical well-being, but for their soul, their character, their place in the cosmos. Frigga took this responsibility seriously, perhaps more seriously than any mother before or after. She poured everything she had into Baldur. She taught him about kindness, about compassion, about the importance of bringing light into the world. She showed him how to be a good god, how to use his power responsibly, how to care for others. But there was something else in Frigga's love for Baldur. There was fear, because even as she loved him, even as she nurtured him, she knew something that most mothers don't know. She knew that the future was not guaranteed. She knew that fate was a real force in the universe. And she knew that Baldur's future was uncertain. In Norse mythology, there is a concept called the Word. It's often translated as fate or destiny, but it's more complex than that. The weird is not something that is fixed and unchangeable. It's more like a current, a tendency, a direction that things are moving in. And a skilled person, a wise person, can sometimes navigate around it or change its course. Frigga understood the word, and she understood that Baldur's word was dangerous. There were prophecies, whispers among the gods, a sense that something dark was coming for him, and Frigga was determined to prevent it. This is where Frigga's protective instinct became something more than ordinary motherhood. This became obsession. This became a mother willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to keep her child safe. Frigga had other children as well. She had Vidar, a strong and silent god. She had Modi and Magni, Thor's sons who she helped raise. She had other children whose names are less well known, but who were still important to her. She loved all of them. But Baldur was different. Baldur was the one she was most afraid of losing. As Baldur grew, Frigga watched him constantly. She was aware of every threat, every potential danger. She thought about what could harm him. And then she did something extraordinary. She decided that she would protect him from all harm. This is not a small decision. This is not something a normal mother could do. But Frigga was not a normal mother. She was a goddess with power and influence, and she was willing to use everything she had to keep her son safe. Frigga went to every living thing in the world. She went to metals and stones. She went to fire and water. She went to plants and animals. She went to diseases and poisons. And she made them all swear an oath. She made them all promise that they would never harm Baldur. Think about the scope of this. She didn't just ask a few things to be careful. She went to everything. Every single thing that could potentially harm her son, she bound with an oath. She created a magical protection around Baldur that was almost impenetrable. And it worked. For a long time, it worked. Baldur became invulnerable. Nothing could hurt him. Weapons bounced off him. Fire couldn't burn him. Poison couldn't touch him. He was safe. He was protected. Frigga's love had created a shield around him that nothing could penetrate. But there was a cost to this protection, and Frigga would eventually pay that cost in full. To understand the cost, you have to understand something about Frigga's other children. While she was pouring all of her attention and energy into protecting Baldur, her other children were growing up in his shadow. They were loved, yes, but they were not loved the way Baldur was loved. They were not the focus of Frigga's protective instinct. This is not to say that Frigga was a bad mother to them. She wasn't. But there is a difference between being a good mother and being an obsessed mother. And with Baldur, Frigga had crossed that line. Frigga's love for Baldur was also complicated by her role as queen. She had responsibilities to all of Asgard, not just to her son. But increasingly, her maternal instinct was overriding her queenly duties. She was making decisions based on what was best for Baldur, not always on what was best for the realm. There's another aspect of Frigga's motherhood that's important to understand. She was not just protecting Baldur from external threats. She was also trying to protect him from the knowledge of his own vulnerability. She wanted him to live in a world where he felt safe, where he didn't have to worry about danger, where he could simply be good and pure and light. In some ways, this was a gift. Baldur grew up without fear. He grew up believing that the world was fundamentally good, that people were fundamentally good, that there was no real danger in existence. This made him who he was. It made him the god of light and goodness that everyone loved. But in other ways, it was a curse. Because Baldur never learned to be cautious. He never learned to be suspicious. He never learned to protect himself. He relied entirely on his mother's protection. And when that protection failed, he had no defenses of his own. Frigga's love for her children was real and profound. But it was also flawed. It was the love of a mother who was trying to control fate itself, who was trying to prevent the inevitable, who was trying to keep her children in a state of perpetual safety and innocence. This is the tragedy of Frigga's motherhood. Not that she loved too little, but that she loved in a way that was ultimately unsustainable. She loved in a way that was based on denial, on the belief that she could prevent suffering, on the belief that she could protect her children from the fundamental realities of existence. As we move forward in her story, as we approach the moment that will change everything, it's important to remember this. Frigga's actions, her choices, her desperate attempts to protect Baldur, they all come from this place of profound, all-consuming maternal love. She is not a villain. She is not even making a mistake in her own mind. She is doing what she believes any mother would do. She is trying to save her child. But the universe has other plans. And Frigga is about to learn a lesson that no mother should have to learn. She is about to discover that love, no matter how powerful, no matter how pure, cannot always protect us from what is coming. Chapter 6. Frigga's Grief and the Search for Redemption. The moment Baldur died, Asgard fell into darkness. Not literal darkness, but a darkness of the spirit. The realm that had been filled with light and joy and celebration became a place of mourning, and at the center of that mourning was Frigga. Frigga's grief was not something that could be contained or hidden. It was not something that she could process quietly in her chambers. It was a grief so profound, so all-consuming, that it affected everyone around her. The other gods felt it. The inhabitants of Asgard felt it. Even the realm itself seemed to respond to her sorrow. For days, Frigga did not eat. She did not sleep. She did not speak. She simply sat with Baldur's body, holding him, unable to accept that he was truly gone. She kept waiting for him to wake up, kept waiting for this to be revealed as some kind of terrible mistake, kept waiting for the universe to correct itself and give her back her son. But he did not wake up, and the universe did not correct itself. And Frigga had to face a reality that she had spent her entire life trying to prevent. As the initial shock of Baldur's death began to fade, Frigga's grief transformed into something else. It transformed into determination, because Frigga was not a goddess who accepted defeat easily, and she was not going to accept the death of her son. She began to think about what could be done. In Norse mythology, death was not always final. There were stories of people being brought back from the dead. There were stories of the boundaries between life and death being crossed. If such things were possible, then perhaps Baldur could be brought back. Frigga knew that Baldur had gone to Hel, the realm of the dead. Hel was ruled by a goddess of the same name, a being who was neither fully alive nor fully dead, who existed in the space between the two states. If Baldur was in Hel's realm, then perhaps Hel could be persuaded to release him. But how could Frigga reach Hel? How could she convince the ruler of the dead to give up one of her subjects? These were not simple questions. But Frigga was determined to find answers. She turned to her son Hermodr, one of Baldur's brothers. Hermodr was swift and brave and loyal, and Frigga asked him to do something that no one had ever asked before. She asked him to ride to Hel's realm and to bring Baldur back. Hermodr agreed without hesitation. He loved his brother, and he respected his mother's determination. So he took Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, the fastest creature in existence, and he rode toward the realm of the dead. The journey to Hel's realm is not a journey that the living are meant to make. Hermodr had to cross 9 worlds. He had to cross rivers and mountains and valleys. He had to pass through gates and barriers that were designed to keep the living out and the dead in. But Hermodr was determined, and Sleipnir was swift, and eventually he reached the gates of Hel's realm. When Hermodr arrived at Hel's hall, he found Baldur sitting there. Baldur was alive, in a sense. He was conscious and aware, but he was also dead. He existed in that strange state between life and death that characterized Hel's realm. Hermodr explained to Hel why he had come. He told her about Frigga's grief. He told her about how much Baldur was loved. He told her about how the entire realm of Asgard was mourning his death. And he asked her if she would release Baldur so that he could return to the world of the living. Hel listened to Hermodr's plea, and she understood the depth of Frigga's love and the magnitude of her loss. But Hel was not a goddess who made exceptions. She was not a goddess who bent her rules, even for the most powerful beings in existence. However, Hel did offer a compromise. She said that she would release Baldur, but only on one condition. Everything in the 9 realms had to weep for Baldur. If everything, absolutely everything, wept for him, then he could return to the world of the living. But if even one thing refused to weep, then Baldur would have to remain in Hel's realm forever. It seemed like an impossible condition. How could everything in existence weep? How could Frigga possibly convince every being, every creature, every force of nature to mourn her son? But Frigga was determined. And when Hermodr returned with Hel's condition, Frigga set out to accomplish what seemed impossible. She sent messengers throughout the 9 realms. She asked every being to weep for Baldur, and they did. The gods wept, the giants wept, the elves wept, the dwarves wept, the animals wept, the plants wept, even the stones wept, even the metals wept. Everything that had ever known Baldur, everything that had ever loved him, wept for his death. Frigga herself wept. She wept tears of grief and desperation and love. She wept as she had never wept before. And her tears were so profound, so genuine, that they seemed to touch something in the very fabric of existence. But there was one being who did not weep. There was one being who refused to mourn Baldur's death, and that being was Loki. Loki, disguised as an old woman, sat in a cave and refused to weep. He said that Baldur had never done anything for him. He said that he had no reason to mourn. and his refusal to weep meant that Hel's condition could not be met. Baldur could not return. When Frigga learned that Loki had refused to weep, something inside her shattered. She had done everything she could. She had convinced the entire world to mourn her son. She had gathered tears from every being in existence, and it had not been enough. One being, one malicious being, had refused to participate in the mourning, and that refusal had sealed Baldur's fate. Frigga's grief transformed into rage. She wanted to punish Loki. She wanted to make him pay for what he had done. But she also knew that punishment would not bring Baldur back. And so she was left with a grief that had no outlet, a rage that could not be satisfied, a loss that could not be undone. In the aftermath of this failed attempt to bring Baldur back, Frigga had to confront something that she had been avoiding. She had to accept that Baldur was truly gone, that he would not return, that her love, her power, her determination, none of it could change what had happened. This acceptance did not come quickly, and it did not come easily. But gradually, over time, Frigga began to process her grief in a different way. She began to understand that her role as a mother had changed. She could no longer protect Baldur. She could no longer guide him. She could no longer be present in his life. But she could remember him. She could honor his memory. She could ensure that his legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had loved him. Frigga's relationship with Odin changed after Baldur's death. The two of them had shared a partnership, a respect, a kind of love. But now there was a distance between them. Odin had known that Baldur would die. He had known about the prophecy. And he had not told Frigga. He had let her believe that her protection would be enough. And when it failed, Frigga felt a sense of betrayal. Odin, for his part, was grieving in his own way. But his grief was different from Frigga's. Odin had always understood that death was inevitable, that loss was part of the cosmic order, that even the gods could not escape the weird. Frigga had believed that love could transcend these limitations, and now she was learning that it could not. Frigga's role as queen also changed. She continued to fulfill her duties. She continued to manage Asgard. She continued to counsel the other gods. But something had shifted. She was no longer the same goddess who had believed that she could control fate. She was now a goddess who understood, deeply and painfully, that there were limits to what even the most powerful being could do. In some ways, Frigga's grief made her a better queen. She became more compassionate. She understood suffering in a way that she had not understood it before. She could empathize with others who were grieving, who were struggling, who were facing losses that they could not prevent. But in other ways, Frigga's grief diminished her. The light that had always surrounded her seemed dimmer. The confidence that had always characterized her seemed shaken. The belief that she could solve any problem, overcome any obstacle, seemed to have been broken by the weight of Baldur's death. Frigga never fully recovered from Baldur's death. The loss was too profound, too fundamental to who she was. But she learned to live with it. She learned to carry her grief without being consumed by it. She learned to honor Baldur's memory while continuing to live her own life. And in doing so, Frigga learned something that no amount of power or wisdom could have taught her. She learned that love is not about control. Love is not about preventing suffering. Love is about showing up, being present, and honoring those we care about, even when we cannot protect them from harm. This was Frigga's greatest lesson, and it was a lesson that she would carry with her for the rest of her existence. Chapter 7. Frigga's Legacy, Why She Matters Today. Frigga's story did not end with Baldur's death. Her life continued. The realm continued. The cycles of existence continued. But Frigga herself was forever changed by what she had experienced. And that change, that transformation, that journey from a goddess who believed she could control fate to a goddess who understood the limits of her power, that became her true legacy. In Norse culture, Frigga was revered as the goddess of motherhood, of marriage, of domestic life, of fertility. But after Baldur's death, her significance deepened. She became something more. She became a symbol of maternal love in all its complexity. She became a symbol of the lengths that a mother will go to protect her children. And she became a symbol of the pain that comes when that protection fails. Frigga's name itself carries meaning. In Old Norse, her name is related to words meaning beloved and wife. But it also carries connotations of power and authority. Frigga was not just a beloved wife. She was a powerful queen. She was a force in her own right, and her legacy reflects this duality. In the centuries after the Norse civilization, Frigga's story was passed down through generations. It was told and retold, adapted and reinterpreted. Different cultures took her story and made it their own. Different peoples found different meanings in her journey. In Germanic cultures, Frigga became associated with the home and hearth. She was the goddess who protected the family, who ensured that the household ran smoothly, who kept the bonds of kinship strong. Mothers would invoke her name when they were struggling with the challenges of raising children. Women would call upon her for strength and wisdom as they navigated the complexities of marriage and family life. In Scandinavian cultures, Frigga remained a symbol of queenly power and authority. She was remembered as a ruler who had wielded her power wisely, who had cared for her realm, who had made decisions that served the greater good. Women who held positions of authority looked to her as an example of how to lead with both strength and compassion. As time passed and cultures changed, Frigga's story continued to resonate. It resonated because it spoke to something universal in the human experience. It spoke to the experience of loving someone deeply and being unable to protect them from harm. It spoke to the experience of loss and grief, and the struggle to continue living after that loss. It spoke to the experience of discovering that we are not as powerful as we believed ourselves to be. In modern times, Frigga's story has taken on new significance. In a world where mothers are often expected to be perfect, to have all the answers, to be able to protect their children from every possible harm, Frigga's story offers a different perspective. It offers the perspective of a mother who did everything she could and still failed. And it offers the perspective of a mother who learned to accept that failure and to continue living anyway. Frigga's story is also relevant to anyone who has experienced the loss of someone they love. It speaks to the desperate desire to undo what has been done, to bring back what has been lost, to find some way to reverse the irreversible. It speaks to the realization that some things cannot be undone, and it speaks to the slow, painful process of accepting that reality. There is also something in Frigga's story that speaks to the modern understanding of power and control. Frigga believed that if she was powerful enough, if she was wise enough, if she loved deeply enough, she could control the outcome of events. She believed that she could prevent suffering, and she discovered that she could not. This is a lesson that many people in modern society need to learn. We live in a culture that often promises us that if we just work hard enough, if we just plan carefully enough, if we just love deeply enough, we can control our lives and prevent bad things from happening. Frigga's story tells us that this is not true. There are limits to what we can control, and accepting those limits is not a failure. It is a form of wisdom. Frigga's relationship with her other children also carries meaning for modern audiences. While she was focused on protecting Baldur, her other children were growing up in his shadow. This speaks to the reality that when we focus all of our attention on one person, on one goal, on one outcome, we often neglect other important relationships and responsibilities. Frigga's story suggests that balance is important, that we cannot pour all of our love and energy into one person without consequences for others. Frigga's role as queen is also relevant to modern discussions about power and leadership. She wielded her power not through domination or force, but through wisdom, compassion, and an understanding of how to bring people together. She was a leader who cared about the well-being of all those under her authority, not just the powerful or the privileged. In a modern context, this speaks to the kind of leadership that many people are seeking. Leadership that is based on service rather than domination. Leadership that is based on wisdom rather than force. Leadership that is based on compassion rather than control. Frigga's story also speaks to the importance of accepting help and support from others. After Baldur's death, Frigga did not try to handle her grief alone. She reached out to her son, Hermodr. She asked for his help. She allowed others to support her in her mourning. This is an important message in a culture that often valorizes independence and self-sufficiency. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is ask for help. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is accept support from those who love us. In the context of Norse mythology as a whole, Frigga's story is significant because it shows us that even the gods are not immune to suffering. Even the most powerful beings in existence cannot prevent loss and grief. Even the most loving mothers cannot protect their children from all harm. This is a humbling message. But it is also a liberating message. Because if even the gods cannot control everything, then perhaps we should not expect ourselves to control everything either. Frigga's legacy is also one of resilience. After Baldur's death, she did not give up. She did not retreat from the world. She did not stop being a queen, a mother, a counselor, a force in the cosmos. She continued to live. She continued to work. She continued to care for those around her. And in doing so, she showed us what it means to be resilient in the face of profound loss. There is also something in Frigga's story that speaks to the cyclical nature of existence. In Norse mythology, the world is not eternal. It will eventually end in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. But after Ragnarok, the world will be reborn. New gods will emerge. New life will begin. This cycle of death and rebirth, of ending and beginning, is central to Norse cosmology. And Frigga's story, with its themes of loss and the struggle to continue living, reflects this larger cosmic cycle. In modern spiritual and religious contexts, Frigga has become a figure of veneration for many people. Those who practice Norse paganism or heathenry often invoke her name in rituals and prayers. They call upon her for protection, for wisdom, for strength in times of difficulty. They see in her a model of how to live with integrity, with compassion, and with an understanding of one's own limitations. Frigga's story is also relevant to discussions about grief and mourning in modern society. In many modern cultures, grief is something that is expected to be processed quickly and privately. People are expected to move on after a loss. But Frigga's story suggests that grief is not something that can be rushed. It is not something that can be overcome through sheer force of will. It is something that must be experienced, honored, and integrated into our understanding of who we are. The fact that Frigga's story has endured for over 1,000 years, that it has been told and retold in countless different contexts and cultures, speaks to its fundamental relevance to the human experience. It speaks to something universal in what it means to be human. It speaks to our capacity for love, our desire to protect those we care about, our struggle to accept the limits of our power, and our ability to continue living even after profound loss. Frigga's legacy is not one of triumph or victory. It is not a story of a hero who overcomes all obstacles and achieves her goals. It is a story of a goddess who faces a loss that she cannot prevent, who tries desperately to undo what has been done, who fails in that attempt, and who learns to live with that failure. And in that failure, in that acceptance of limitation, in that continued commitment to life and love despite profound loss, Frigga becomes something greater than she was before. She becomes a symbol of human resilience. She becomes a symbol of the strength that comes not from controlling our circumstances, but from accepting them and continuing to live with integrity and compassion. This is why Frigga's story still matters today. This is why people continue to tell her story, to study her story, to find meaning in her story. Because her story speaks to something fundamental about what it means to be alive, to love, to grieve, and to continue living in the face of loss. Reflective conclusion. When we began this journey tonight, we met a goddess who believed she could control fate. We met a queen who wielded power with wisdom and compassion. We met a mother whose love was so profound that it shaped the destiny of gods and realms. But by the end of her story, Frigga had become something different. She had become a goddess who understood that some things cannot be controlled. She had become a queen who knew that power has limits. She had become a mother who learned that love cannot always protect us from loss. This transformation, this journey from certainty to acceptance, from control to surrender, is what makes Frigga's story so powerful. Because it is not a story about a hero who overcomes all obstacles. It is a story about a being who faces something she cannot overcome, and who finds a way to continue living anyway. Frigga teaches us something that is difficult to learn but essential to understand. She teaches us that love is not about controlling outcomes. Love is not about preventing suffering. Love is about showing up. It is about being present with those we care about. It is about honoring them, protecting them as best we can, and accepting when our protection is not enough. She teaches us that power is not about domination or control. Real power is about wisdom. It is about knowing when to act and when to accept. It is about using our strength to serve others, not to bend the world to our will. She teaches us that grief is not something to be overcome quickly or hidden away. Grief is something to be honored. It is evidence that we have loved deeply. It is a testament to the significance of those we have lost. And it is something we can carry with us while still continuing to live. Frigga's story also teaches us about resilience. Not the kind of resilience that means never falling, never breaking, never being hurt, but the kind of resilience that means falling and getting back up, breaking and learning to live with the broken pieces, being hurt and choosing to love anyway. In the end, Frigga did not get what she wanted. She could not bring Baldur back. She could not prevent his death. She could not control the outcome of events, no matter how much power she wielded or how deeply she loved. But she got something else. She got wisdom. She got understanding. She got the knowledge that comes only from facing loss and surviving it. She got the strength that comes from accepting what cannot be changed and continuing to live with integrity and compassion anyway. And perhaps that is the greatest gift that Frigga's story can give us. Not the promise that if we love deeply enough or work hard enough, we can prevent bad things from happening, but the assurance that even when bad things do happen, even when we fail to prevent loss, even when our hearts are broken, we can still continue. We can still find meaning. We can still love. We can still live. Frigga's story is an ancient story. It comes from a culture that lived over 1,000 years ago, but it speaks to something timeless in the human experience. It speaks to the universal experience of loving someone and being unable to protect them from harm. It speaks to the universal experience of loss and grief. It speaks to the universal struggle to accept what we cannot change. And it speaks to the universal capacity for resilience, for growth, for finding meaning even in the darkest moments of our lives. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, carrying Frigga's story with you, remember this. Remember that you are stronger than you think. Remember that love, even when it fails to prevent loss, is still beautiful and meaningful. Remember that accepting what you cannot control is not weakness. It is wisdom. Remember Frigga. Remember her strength and her vulnerability. Remember her power and her limitations. Remember her love and her loss. And remember that her story, like all great stories, is ultimately a story about being human, about loving deeply, about facing loss, and about finding the strength to continue living, with grace and compassion no matter what comes. Thank you for spending this time with Frigga. Thank you for allowing her story to become part of your night. And may you sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of growth, of understanding, and of continuing forward. Rest now. Frigga's story is complete, and so is your journey through the 9 realms of Norse mythology tonight.